I'm Nairy Baghramian. I'm the director here at SculptureCenter. Welcome to our third and last lecture in our series, Subjective Histories of Sculpture. We present this lecture series, we've been doing it for, I think, about 6 years, and we present it in collaboration with the Vera List Center for Art and Politics at the New School. Usually we do them at the New School, but sometimes we like to mix it up and do it out here. So in the next year, you'll keep an eye out for it's there again. Before I introduce Josephine, I just wanted to just make an announcement about our next exhibition. It's always kind of weird to have people in the space when there's no art on view. But we're in between shows. In a few days we'll start installing a show, which is Bill Bollinger, the Retrospective. It's an exhibition that was organized by Mr. Sam Lichtenstein, very significant artist who was active in New York from 1966 to 74 and has been completely under-recognized since then. So we're really excited to bring his work to New York, where he lived and spent his art career. And that show is on April 22nd with a reception from 5 to 7, so I hope you'll come back to see that. I will now introduce Josephine so we can go right along and start her talk. But Josephine was born in Germany, but has lived in the United States for over 20 years. She went to the University of Arts in Berlin and did her MFA at Totem Institute of Arts. I think she has an incredible talent for distilling ideas into deceptively simple critical statements. I think a really good example of this is the video 0% Down, which I saw in your studio, I want to say 5 or 6 years ago, which was, it is a montage of found car commercials with a soundtrack, industrial noise soundtrack by Boyd Rice called Total War. The name of the song is Total War. And I think it was a really brilliant, cutting critique of the military-industrial complex, but updated with Hollywood and Madison Avenue. And
we will actually see it tonight.
Oh, you're going to show it? Okay.
A clip from it.
And then it kind of foreshadows the credit crisis. I really was really impressed with the video. So I think most of you will probably know the work, so I won't go into that elaborate detail, especially since you're going to see some clips as well. But just by way of background, as many of you probably are aware, Josephine has been exhibiting internationally for quite some time, and she regularly exhibits both in the US and Europe. She's had major solo exhibitions at the Nairy Museum in Zurich, the Kunstmuseum Stuttgart, and at the Indianapolis Museum of Art. She's been in many prominent group shows, including New Photography at MoMA in 2008, the Guggenheim, Walker Art Center, Tate Modern, and the Whitney Biennial. And if you aren't aware, she currently has a major public art project on view in Times Square called the Manhattan Oil Project, and I highly recommend a visit. It's 8th Avenue between 46...
On 46.
at the corner of 46th Street. So definitely, it'll be there for another 2 months?
A month, 1 month.
One more month. So if you haven't been over there, I recommend taking a drive-by at least. But actually, it's much easier to walk. So with no further ado, I'll turn over to Josephine Meckseper.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for coming. I guess I have to adjust this slightly. So yeah, I wanted to start by showing works, or sort of like the evolution of how I derived at this Manhattan Oil Project in Times Square, which started out by going to this town called Electra in Texas, that is, or used to be, the oil pump capital of this country. And at this point, it's more sort of like a graveyard of these oil pump jacks that have really defined the industrial revolution and the the wealth that this country accumulated in the beginning of the 20th century, and is now sort of the indicator and the emblem really of our culture, and sort of like the problems that we're facing in terms of natural resources. And the sculptures that I made are actually really based on oil pumps that I saw in Texas, and the size and the scale. And even the colors are based on these oil pump jacks that I saw. And here you see them in construction in the shop in New Jersey where they were built. So they were really basically like replicas of real oil pump jacks, and it's not so much like an art fabrication process, but like a real copying of these kind of technical drawings. And the idea was really to use the opportunity of doing a public sculpture that has real sort of implications, and sort of gives a sense of what like the present tense is actually made of, and sort of juxtaposing that or as the backdrop of Times Square, which is all about entertainment and diversion, and this very kind of entertainment and capitalist environment, to actually show artworks that are a lot more political than the context that they're being seen in. The interesting thing is really that, intentionally, they are very casually installed in this dirt parking lot that, in the end, people who walk by are very confused as where to these, structures are actually pumping for oil or not. And it's about 50-50, like the people that you talk to seem to really think that, the city is straight, drilling for oil. And then, there's a small sign at the gate where you can see that it's something art-related, but I specifically asked that it wouldn't have a massive kind of explanation, so that people actually would, think about, what is actually going on right now, and especially people who come in and out of theaters or are just sort of visiting Times Square or coming out of Port Authority, are kind of confronted with these sort of emblems of oil production, and sort of what it represents in terms of military operations, and Times Square having the recruiting station that is directly tied into the oil production, and one of the reasons why people have to go to Iraq and countries like that. But on the other side, the works were also influenced by earlier constructivist sculptures, like this Tatlin sculpture of the First International in 1920 in Russia. And his idea was really to make works that are disconnected from an art discourse, but that also represent something completely real, and that is really just about how machines can actually evoke the same presence or force that art can, and that you, as an artist, have the option to create something that is actually completely mechanical. And this idea, this kind of model that he built was supposed to be a full-scale tower that was completely functional, but it was never built, of course. But I was also thinking about what the actual real monuments of our time are, aside from these oil pump jacks, which I thought are very emblematic of our culture. But in my lifetime, there were other sort of really big historical monuments that I, feel have the same kind of power, are kind of equally important in terms of the evolution of this piece. And this, for example, is Chernobyl in 1986, and how that really represents an endpoint in sort of our sort of quest for like more energy and how, you know, that's going to affect people in like hundreds of thousands of years because of the environmental damages that it can cause. At the same time, being in Berlin in '89, when the wall came down, it also sort of represented this incredibly important sort of historical monument that, you know, has so many implications that, you know, art works can't really express in that kind of intensity. And you had like really big monuments like the Lenin sculptures that were dismantled after having been these like really important monuments of the ideology of the time. This particular one was actually cut in pieces and then buried in the sand outside of Berlin, sort of as a gesture of like putting an end to the regime at the time. And then, of course, the World Trade Centers and their complete destruction in 2001. And then I was also thinking about Marc de Souvero and how he has always, you know, thought about like his political surroundings in Vietnam, and has always been a very political artist. But at the same time, his sculpture at Zuccotti Park was also used as a meeting point and sort of the center, or sort of like an emblem of revolt against the capitalist system. So there's kind of this full cycle of how art and real, like, historical monuments can merge. And that was something that I was particularly interested in when I did these oil pump sculptures, because I really wanted to do something that relates to like our lives now, and it's not just kind of a blown up version of something small in the studio. And I basically started out when I went to Cal Arts. One of my first works was related to the Rodney King riots, when we were doing this kind of situationist-inspired performance on a roof in Hollywood. And then while we were filming, it was kind of this 24-hour kind of happening. The riots actually started around us, and we ended up filming the smoke and the fires. And it became this kind of weird, document that started out as being something about creating an environment or sort of a situation outside of the capitalist system, but then it was completely sort of overshadowed by the real events around us. And this is just a clip from this 24-hour long footage that we shot. And then, my first kind of sculpture installations also at Cal Arts were these installations that involved props that I got from film companies in Hollywood. And I sort of loaded this like gallery space at Cal Arts with these props and artifacts and sort of film footage that I shot at a local bank. But the show was literally shut down like the first day at its opening, because some students had tipped off the police and they thought that all the props were actually real. So the show was very short-lived, actually. And then coming to New York in the 90s, after going to Cal Arts, I really thought that there was no real point in making sort of consumer or sort of commercial artworks for the gallery system, and I decided instead to publish this magazine called Fat, and it was really more like a conceptual project, because it wasn't really a magazine, but it was like a pamphlet that was in a way inspired by Jean-Paul Marat's magazine L'Ami du Peuple, which means Friends of the People, which was like the only real magazine of the French Revolution in France. And it was meant to be like for sort of the everyday person. And at the same time, I collaborated with artists to create works and to do interviews in this magazine, but it was really designed in a way that it looked like a tabloid and that people would literally pick up on a newsstand or in a supermarket. So it was more like a social sculpture in a sense that it was very, the authorship was very unclear. It was like people didn't really know who made the magazine. And it would just sort of appear at weird newsstands and on kiosks, and people didn't really know quite what to make of it. And then after a while, like about 10 years ago, I started inserting these magazines into these kind of display forms where I merged images that I took myself at different demonstrations and riots and with these kind of consumer products into like a three-dimensional collage that was actually not very different from the magazine, but it kind of reached into the space and it kind of combined the realness of like documentary images with found consumer products. These images are from a demonstration in Berlin against W. Bush when he was sort of doing a crusade in Europe in 2002 to win over governments to support his war in Afghanistan and Iraq. So yeah, when I was a teenager, I went to a lot of demonstrations like this one in northern Germany that was against nuclear power, and that in a way kind of really influenced my later work, this kind of documentary approach on everything that happened around me, be it sort of political actions or also like the shop window that kind of, to me, is the epitome of cultural and consumer culture. And all that was already critiqued and heavily criticized, of course, by the Baghramian group in the 70s. And it wasn't just kind of a revolt against the right, or it wasn't just sort of a fight for like a Marxist regime, but it was really a fight against capitalism. And this little clip shows sort of some of their ideas and concepts.
How can we allow them to murder in our name? Americans out of Vietnam. We have demonstrated once too often in an orderly, appropriate and unsuccessful fashion. We have had enough of providing the veneer of democracy.
Die Straße spielte auch in die Wohnung hinein. Also es war quasi so eine Auflösung von.
I think we wanted to be part of a more international youth movement, which was, I think, then happening. With music, demonstrations, new ideas, anti-war movement. We tried to join up with other people, and I think we despised what our parents had created. We were angry that we had to live with a past like that. Our generation was in love with the revolution.
Und dass man versucht, das mit sich fertig zu bringen.
War sehr von sich überzeugt, alles immer auf die Spitze zu treiben und dann
In Western society, the system has managed to drag the masses so deeply into their own crap that they seem to have lost any feeling for their position as exploited and oppressed, so that they dream of nothing more than a car, a holiday, and a tiled bathroom.
So yeah, and then some of the sculptures that I made in the last few years, like this one that was shown in Germany, reflect, those types of thoughts that, I had, when I was a teenager, but that was also, very, like a forming sense that, like people in the 70s in Germany really had against sort of capitalism. And these particular mannequins were shown with another film that I did of a demonstration against the war in Iraq. And the mannequins in the sort of jeans dropped down like that were inspired by a window that I'd actually seen like on the boardwalk in Stuttgart where this museum was, and I just thought it was such a perfect sort of combination of sort of letting the pants down and kind of exposing like the truth of what is actually happening at the time. So a lot of these works kind of play with these found consumer products, but also juxtaposed with text that I create or that is based on like different types of manifests and written pamphlets by various people. And these types of totem sculptures combine these kind of leftover products of our society into these kind of narratives of what our lives are made of. And instead of kind of telling the story of a person like the Western or the Native Indian totem sculptures did, these pieces are actually just summing up, the debris of our culture and in this much more kind of bleak way. And in the window display sculptures that I've been doing, there's a lot of broken glass because I really made those works as indicators of, like a moment where the protest that I film, pans over to the shop window that is being destroyed. And these vitrines really symbolize or are sort of targets of that kind of action. And they are usually comprised of these very absurd objects to really exemplify the absurdity of this consumer display. So there's really nothing like affirmative about the use of products. It's not that I think that any of these things are particularly interesting or amazing. It's really more about showing kind of like the randomness and the kind of multitude of products and how they can become targets. And at the same time how, like in a Marxist kind of sense, the products always reveal, or I mean in this case reveal, but usually disguise and conceal the power structure that is behind them. And so here in this case you see like the absurd kind of Calvin Klein package with like the Chinese labor glued on the back of it. So there's always some kind of narrative going on. Like in this window, there's a little sign that you can't see that is on the bottom of the shelf that indicates that all these products were made by the inmates of the prison across the street. Because in Chelsea, there's actually one of the last female detention centers in the city, just sort of in the middle of the gallery scenario. And a lot of people don't even know about that. And I decided to make these works specifically sort of in relationship to that prison across the street. And at the same time, there were these kind of hints on how these monopolies are arising, like Gagosian and Duane Reade are sort of taking over the sort of, every street corner has a Duane Reade right now, and Gagosian is kind of like that too. Yeah, I mean, a lot of these works were made around, like, between 2006 and 2008, and they really, to me, were like a discourse about the, like the high point and the, really like the emblematic sort of Bush era and its kind of destruction and the bizarre kind of moment where you live in a country that actually fights a war, but you really don't see it, and it's only related to you through the media. And what does it mean to make art in a situation where the country that you live in is actually fighting wars, and what is your responsibility as an artist in that situation? The next film is a demonstration that I shot in New York in 2006 of that time.
You shall hear nothing, you shall see nothing, you shall think nothing, you shall speak nothing. You shall hear nothing, you shall see nothing, you shall think nothing, you shall speak nothing. You shall hear nothing, you shall see nothing, you shall think nothing, you shall speak nothing. You shall hear nothing, you shall see nothing, you shall think nothing, you shall speak nothing. You shall hear nothing, you shall see nothing, you shall think nothing, you shall speak nothing. You shall hear nothing, you shall see nothing, you shall think nothing, you shall speak nothing. You shall hear nothing, you shall see nothing, you shall think nothing, you shall speak nothing.
And at that time, I was really thinking about how other artists had dealt with, the situation of living under a war, in a wartime, and how they had translated that into their work. In this case, Otto Dix, who depicted a lot of veterans and injured soldiers coming back to Berlin, and sort of the brutality and the ugliness of all that. And at the same time, also, of course, Picasso with his Guernica painting. And in this exhibition at the Migros Museum, I really wanted to point out all the kind of most emblematic images, or also manifestations of that kind of war moment. And I used Paul Aurelio's bunker photography as a kind of plan for the sculpture that is in the foreground. It's based on these kind of French Atlantic bunkers, and I really wanted to kind of draw a relationship between the theoretical ideas that Aurelio had about speed and military, and how it translates into our into our presence. And not that different from Otto Dix, or kind of inspired by him, I ended up using these kind of prothesis, lag type pieces in my work that were really specifically about the veterans who, as we all know, are now, in hospitals in this country and are kind of suffering silently, and we don't really read that much about them. And at the same time, I was really interested in the kind of implications or the symptomaticness of the car culture and how it seeps so deeply into our culture and how everything is kind of focused around that. And at the time when the show opened, it was actually the day when Saab declared bankruptcy and where GM also started having severe problems. So it was kind of a bizarre moment where all these things kind of coalesced, where like the epitome of that kind of like extreme consumption and wasting of energy kind of reached a point where things really came to a halt and everything collapsed. And the next clip is actually that film that Mary was talking about. It's called 0% Down, and it's really a collage of car commercials that I saw, like when I flipped through channels in 2007, I believe. The tone of the car commercials was extremely aggressive and very militaristic, and I decided to collect all these different car commercials, and I even contacted different car companies, and they sent me all their kind of high-res car commercials for this project. And the sound is composed by this musician called Boyd Rice, and it's really just the speech by Goebbels from 1942, "Do you want total war?" which was the beginning of the absolute destruction of Europe. And it's now kind of underlined with these car commercials. So you'll see. And in these vitrine type works, you see different sort of elements of both the protest culture and the consumer culture combined in one piece to kind of show that kind of dialogue and dialectic kind of issue that we're facing right now, where nothing is really exempt from like all the issues that we're facing in terms of the environment and natural resources. And one of the next works that I did, and that was also actually part of the show, was the film that I shot in Indianapolis at the Mall of America, which in a way also stands out as this kind of example of like the historical or kind of cultural monument, where I've always been fascinated that people would even come up with a name like that, the Mall of America, as if it's kind of like an amazing accomplishment or kind of on the same level as like the Eiffel Tower or the pyramids. That that's like the end point of like cultural or just sort of production of our time. And I set out to just shoot the mall, but then I ended up coming across this kind of recruiting station slash kind of video game place. And so the camera is kind of zooming in and out of the mall into the recruiting station, which kind of makes or slants the whole piece into something much more sinister, and also really shows the flip side of our culture and what it takes to sustain this kind of capitalist system. When I shot the film, it was also, I think, really at the onset of the recession, so it was incredibly empty. It was this long sort of empty hallways, and it was very kind of creepy and kind of inspired me to do this kind of more almost horror movie-like film. And then by using these color gels that are really sort of red, white, and blue colors to sort of subvert and undermine the idea of patriotism that was so blatantly kind of on display at the recruiting station. I wanted to make or sort of create a sense of imminent danger and kind of this, seemingly benign situation can actually harbor real consequences. And so this was just sort of a detail of the film, just a little bit longer than what we saw. And then out of that film came an installation that was inspired by these kind of numbing displays at the mall, and but also kind of critiquing it at the same time, and also self-conscious about being artworks themselves, and kind of what cultural production really means in our time, and how complicit and sort of implicit artworks and cultural production is in the entire system, and how the works themselves can't really escape any of the problems that the films are touching. And then the sculptural works were expanded by these kind of slat wall type pieces that I found inspiration in all these different shops in Chinatown and Midtown that use these kind of materials, throughout their store to hang various products on that. I always think about how the person who works in the store kind of creates or kind of curates their own display, and how that kind of action is kind of the only moment in their kind of exploited kind of work situation where they have some kind of liberty to do something. And I often come across these shops in Chinatown that are incredibly funny, and where the people that work there end up putting little pictures of themselves in the displays, and these really bizarre things start happening. And a little bit of that sometimes appears in my work, and kind of creating these absurd kind of moments. Like this, for example, is a shop in Chinatown in my area. And at the same time, the works are also picking up these different images that are shot at protests where people build entire little towns out of umbrellas, and it's a very kind of common thing that I encountered in different countries wherever there's a protest, like people. So the umbrella becomes this kind of cultural referent that I wanted to use in a political sense, but also, having sort of a reference on how art itself can become like a tool for cultural imperialism, where there's a theory like that in the 50s abstract expressionism was actually sort of used or abused by the CIA to promote Western and American imperialism into communist countries, and so there's kind of that sense that art itself is not exempt from these kind of imperialistic trappings. Yeah, and this piece was in a way inspired by Hitchcock, and I was interested in sort of bringing in the whole idea of Hollywood and the sort of propaganda machine that it stands for, and how that also has a huge impact on sort of the subconscious or kind of like overall cultural feeling that all kind of connects us, and how we can't really escape these strong images once we're exposed to them. And then these are newer works that combine slat walls and vitrines, and also at the same time use art historical moments to really make a point about how art becomes entrapped in these kind of vitrines and automatically becomes like a signifier for the present projected into the future, and how all cultural production is actually just, or at least how I lay it out, it's kind of a glimpse into our present that at a later point will be seen as a cultural artifact. And then this was in Sharjah in 2011. It was a biennial, and I ended up making this installation that was this huge prayer rugs of like this Palestinian scarf pattern, where people could see like a film that is kind of like a collage of Dallas and Dynasty, but only showing like the scenes that directly have to do with oil production. And in one of the early scenes of Dynasty, the show actually takes place in like a fictitious Middle Eastern country, and they end up being thrown out of the country, and that sort of becomes the trigger, the beginning of the oil empire that they then start in the United States. And these are just different sculptures that also relate to oil sort of products and tar, and kind of like different political situations revolving around that. And then next is a clip from the film that was in that Sharjah exhibition, which is really a collage of the shows Dallas and Dynasty.
child? Where's your child? Do you know? Where's your child? Do you know? Look around. Nowhere to be found. Whoa. Where's your child?
Yeah, and that, work also indirectly inspired the works that I did in Times Square. It kind of comes to like a full circle in that sense that, there's like an entire decade that, this country was really dealing with like the subject of like what do we do about natural resources and what are the consequences and like where is this kind of leading, and there's no real answer to any of these things. But to me, or in my work, it's more interesting to deal with subjects that are actually real or that are of our time than sort of just creating something that is subjective and kind of outside of like the reality of what's around me. And that can be, the realness can be like the weird shops in my neighborhood, and like sort of like the sense and the manifestation of what our capitalist society is, but also what its alternatives or oppositional voices are in terms of demonstrations or actions like Occupy Wall Street or riots all over the world. So all these things kind of coalesce in the work to kind of give a glimpse of our time. That's it. Any questions? It's called Manhattan Oil Project.
Not the empty block.
No, it's called Manhattan Oil Project.
There was an empty block before, or no?
It is current. It's an empty lot that is owned by a theater company called the Schubert Foundation, and they're letting the Art Production Fund use the lot for a year to do different art projects. And I think Kiki Smith might be the next artist who's doing a project there.
So, all the sculptures are made out of the kind of junk of consumer culture. Does it bug you at all that you have to participate in the culture that you kind of hate to make the sculpture?
Sometimes.
You gotta buy the stuff and make it. And it kind of fuels the fire.
Well, I think it's what I decided to do, and I have an option to do something else, but this is what I decided to do. But it's definitely the case that as an artist you don't always like the things that you make. It's not like you're doing it out of like an affirmative kind of a need to create that piece, but it's really more about a comment about something that you want to kind of discuss. So there's definitely sort of a love-hate relationship, if anything, going on, where I definitely don't necessarily like the things that I show, especially, like the things that you find in like the window displays or the shelves. They're just kind of emblems of culture or of consumer products, and but it's not something that I make because I want to create it, basically.
Are you an American legally?
Nope. Not at all. I have 0 rights, actually. Could be deported at any time.
Did you, for the car commercial piece, did you take them and make them black and white, or were they in color originally?
No, I made them black and white because I really wanted to have some kind of relation to like German propaganda films from like the 40s and sort of bring out that kind of sense of like deep kind of sinister propaganda technique.
And who was the musician?
Boyd Rice. Yeah.
We used to refer to those tiny pups as Heckle and Jekyll. You know the Heckle and Jekyll cartoon characters?
No, I don't think I do.
Maybe someone.
You mean the old ones?
Heckle and Jekyll.
No, I've never heard that. No.
It's a cartoon.
I had a question about the aesthetic sensibility of the sculptures in relation to the installations. Some of the installations, like the vitrines and things, take on a lot of the aesthetics of what you would see in the stores, but also as a full installation, they do have like a slick look, like you would see something, say like the car commercials. Is that something that you take on, or do you kind of take those elements also from, say, the store vitrines or store windows and combine them?
You mean if everything is appropriated, or if everything is artificially made?
Just the general aesthetic feel of the sculptures and the installations. If you're more influenced from something that would be like where you take your influences from the window displays, or if that's kind of like an innate sensibility that you're using when you're doing the.
Oh, I see what you mean. No, I mean, I think they're mainly really inspired by things that I've seen in like different places all over the world, and like weird, like East German shop windows or things like in the middle of nowhere, and it's usually inspired by something that I've seen somewhere.
I'm interested in your experience in Sharjah, and also how was that work received there? Because isn't that also very much a sort of charged political environment? I mean, or at least there's definitely a certain amount of control of what is seen and expressed.
Yeah, I mean, it was hard to really get a sense of what people were really thinking. I mean, it seemed a lot more open than you would imagine. I mean, the locals were definitely walking around and looking at the works, and they, were walking around the museum and checking it out, and they seemed to, have different responses. I mean, there were a lot of dudes that were, interested in the car rims and kind of, read the work in this like totally affirmative way of, but that's, part of like the setup of my work, that it's open for interpretation. But I was also really trying not to make work that was, condescending or kind of like showing that as a Western artist you have some kind of knowledge that they don't have. So I wanted to create this kind of open-ended kind of installation with these rugs and kind of legs and things that people, like that was all around that area, because there were all these shops that had these kind of leggings with shoes on, and also these kind of like shiny displays and things. So people definitely, I felt like they really understood like the topology, kind of like the structure of the work, but what it politically meant in having, these kind of oil images of that film, it's unclear, what they really saw in it, but it was set up in a way that was open-ended enough that they, any viewer wouldn't feel kind of left out or shut out. But the whole show, was very spread out over the town, and so you really had to walk around for like an hour to find things, and it was a really interesting experience, actually. And there were, different responses, and then there were issues with censorship, none of which is really surprising because, it is a dictatorship, it's not a democracy. And I think I remember looking at the contracts for the show, it was extremely spelled out that, if at any moment they felt that the work wasn't appropriate, then that could mean anything, it was completely left open what that meant. They could withdraw the work, you would have to refund the money for the production. So, I think most artists knew that when they entered the show. But I do think that it's a really good start, I think it's a really great gesture that they created the biennial, and I think, it's definitely something that's like work in progress, and it's leading kind of in a good direction, I think.
Do you find yourself making work where you surprise yourself in what you're doing? Because a lot of the language that you use through this is that you use these materials to make a comment on something or to show this or show that. Do you find yourself investigating things and taking yourself into places that maybe finding things that you didn't quite understand, that so it's not so much?
Yeah, that's all part of it. I think traveling has a lot to do with it, and sort of, just wandering around in places that you've never been to. And I really I think of the work more as an experiment. It's not really meant to be as hermetic as it might appear. It is actually more kind of an experiment for myself with a sort of uncertain outcome, even though afterwards it looks like it was extremely deliberate, but it's much more open-ended than that, actually.
How do you see your role as an artist? Do you think a little bit upon it? But high art today is also commodification, very much so. And how you use your work as a critique of commodification, and yet you are in the midst of commodification.
Yeah, that question is actually, I get asked every single time I do a lecture, because it is kind of, like the ultimate question, or it is and it isn't, because my work is literally about that particular issue, and how coming from like an institutional critique background at CalArts, you don't really take for granted that like the institutional or the exhibition space, be it a museum or a gallery, is neutral, and you kind of already have like that sense that the minute you show work in an institutional environment, it has kind of a political effect, and you kind of are immediately compromised. There's no escape from that. But that's exactly why I'm making works that kind of undermine or subtly kind of bring those kind of issues out. It's more like bringing things to a point where they become extremely clear and kind of spelled out, rather than concealing them in a way that, all consumer products are kind of made to kind of conceal the power that's behind them and the kind of production that goes into them.
Did you say you stopped making that magazine back?
Yeah, you never really stop, because it's really a conceptual project. So it's, in a way, it's still alive, and it could kind of resurface. But after like an entire decade of kind of just publishing a magazine, I kind of put it to sleep for a while. But it was something interesting in the 90s, because the 90s were, to me, not really a time, or at least I wasn't really interested in like making objects or like creating things. It was more kind of setting a dialogue, or sort of setting a context for that time.
I was curious about the role of the monumental in your work. You kind of touched on it at the beginning, and then you mentioned Paul Virilio, and also when you're talking about the slippage that kind of occurs from like a military-industrial, technocratic, or technological objects into the civilian world. I was wondering if you can comment again some more on the accidental monumental, especially with this piece, and how the idea of the monumental relates to your work.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something, so specific about the context of Times Square, because I really think of Times Square, as a monument in itself, and I thought that it would be extremely problematic to make works that don't already take that into account, and to just kind of drop like a decorative large object there seemed kind of out of the question. And that's why I started looking at these, what I think are monuments of our time or of my lifetime, starting with Chernobyl and the wall in Berlin, that really bring out much more about our culture, and that don't have the pretense of being an art object that people are looking at for like sheer entertainment values, like the poster that's behind the oil pumps that Jesus Christ Superstar poster for a show. I really wanted these pieces to kind of stand out as something that is as real as like a construction site, or like a real event that is outside of that entertainment and diversion context of Times Square.
Do you see all of your work as part of the community?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I think that it is political in a sense to be an artist, because you don't really. You have sort of a way of subverting or working sort of outside of the system. But I think of my work a lot more as like a sociological or sort of historical summing up of our presence and of who we are, and like what it means to be a human being. And it's not so much about like a specific message in which sense it's actually not really political. It's much more kind of a broader sort of window onto our time with all its different facets, be it political or philosophical or material.
The reason I ask is because you don't bring up any of the earlier pieces.
Which earlier pieces are that?
When you were
Oh, you mean as a teenager?
I was thinking the work I saw in.
Well, I was basically a teenager then. But yeah, I don't know what I did then, but it probably had some kind of influence on what I later did, but they were probably not significant works.
Disagree.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.